Welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm JD Wilson, and I am your host. And today on the show, we've got Tom and Dawn Jordy from South Africa, from Johannesburg, South Africa, to be specific. And they are going to come on with us to talk about their life as ETC trainers and Tom specifically, some of his practices that he's been employing as a trauma-informed counselor in schools there in South Africa. And so one of the reasons that we love Tom and Dawn so much, one, they're just the most likable people on earth. And so you'll find that, 5 minutes in, I could not breathe. I was laughing so hard. If you listen to the last episode that the Jordys were on, heard the story of Tom breaking his ankle, and the update to that story is outrageous. So definitely listen, if for nothing else, than for that update and that story, because it is so funny. Sorry, Tom. But I will also say one of the other reasons that we love Tom and Dawn so much is they have just used things to their advantage and allowed both technology and just the opportunities that came up during COVID to advance their work all over the continent of Africa, even into Asia as well. And we'll hear about that in the episode today. And so just a really, really interesting, fun episode with them. They're going to talk about everything from Dawn implementing a bunch of ETC, TBRI practices into their home as a homeschool teacher to their 4 kids. They're also going to talk about Tom's work as a trauma-informed counselor in schools and some of the work that he's been doing in creating trauma-informed classroom policy and coaching and consulting other principals and school leaders on how to do that well in schools around South Africa. So they're just 2 of our favorites. Again, we love them. We're so glad they were able to come on with us. And you're going to love listening to them and just learn a ton today about just practical application, implementation of these principles into real life. So here they are, Tom and Dawn Jordy. Well, we said in the introduction that we were going to have our guests, Tom and Dawn Jordy from South Africa, and we were not lying. They're here with us tonight. And full disclosure, you might have heard us laughing as we started recording because we were deep in conversation and I had not started recording yet. And so we're going to run back through some of what we talked about earlier, and you'll get to hear that now. Tom and Dawn, for people who don't know you guys, why don't you give kind of just a brief background on how you got connected to ETC, and then sort of where you are professionally and life during the days and stuff.
Okay. So I think our journey probably started around 8 years ago with our eldest was adopted. He's now
nearly 11.
So like many of us, we jumped into this boat thinking, I'm a parent, I can do this, I got the skills. Mm-hmm. And then you start to realize, hold on a second, my tool belt is feeling a little light and I'm not coping here. And I think we came across the Connected Child, and then we came across an Empowered to Connect. It was
I just have to say, I was in a very, very dark place. It was like a deep, dark hole.
Yeah.
And I read The Connected Child, and it just I just felt like this ray of hope that just shone over that darkness. And we just never looked back from that moment.
Yeah.
We just grabbed every book and every snippet and podcast and conference and whatever we could.
Yeah. We're now those people who take photos of our book collection and compare it to other people. It was one of the simulcasts we went to, and then I think from there it was just, hey, let's get trained up better in this. Let's see if we can actually get over to the States, and we did, and we managed to do that, and we got trained up as ETC trainers. Came back here, ran a few courses, and then COVID hit, and then I was fortunate enough to train as a TBRI practitioner. So apart from our normal day-to-day family of 4 kiddos, 3 by adoption, I am a wellness counselor and a trauma practitioner working predominantly with kids at school, and I have a private practice, and then we run a a non-profit that also seeks to raise awareness for the need for adoption, foster care, and child protection, and equipping parents now, obviously, with the nice ETC side of things, and also we try to raise funds for families who are looking at adoption, need help with funding for that, or have other specific needs with the kids that they currently look after on that.
So not much. No, not
much.
I mean, and the whole ETC thing just led Tom to do a complete career change, and he's spent the last 2 years getting a whole new degree. And,
it's all your fault, JD. I'm blaming you. I'm in competition with you.
So I do think our families would go toe to toe on busyness, like just on things that we have going on in life. And we have 4 kids also. And it just, okay. One question I have, a follow-up question. People who listened to the last episode with you guys heard about your ankle, and you broke your ankle early on in COVID. And I don't.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
Did you know that he broke the other foot a year later around exactly the same time?
Okay, right. Let's just full disclosure here. The first ankle was broken because I was employing the tactics of playful engagement, jumping from a social distancing sticker to another social distancing sticker. The second broken ankle was again playful engagement when we were playing The Floor is Lava and I was running after my son and discovered that my body cannot take the impact of the 4 stairs going down outside. And so that happened, and then I got COVID. So
while his foot was still in the cast.
I was very grumpy. I think at one point I flung my crutches, and the rubber bit on the end, it actually flew over the tree. But the irony was I couldn't walk then because it was just a metal stub on the floor. So I had to go and buy more rubber stoppers. To be honest, I can't make this stuff up. So yes, but my foot is fine. Thank you very much. I am now permanently wearing tackies because I find that I can't wear smart shoes because they hurt.
Okay, will you tell?
But they are cool. They're blue, so I do look pretty cool.
So people who are not familiar with the term tackies, will you explain what that is?
Sneakers, sorry.
Yeah.
Running shoes.
Yes. I feel like we might need some more support than that. We can talk about that after the call, though. I did not realize there was such a loaded question when I asked how the ankle was. But I'm glad to hear that it's healed. I'm glad to hear that there was no further damage to the crutches or anything else. And so that's great. So Dawn, you mentioned, before we started recording, you are the headmaster of Geordie Academy at home, right?
Yes, I am.
You homeschool. And so what if I wonder if we could start there, like in the kind of the homeschooling setting, and obviously you've got kind of a community of folks that you do that with, and that's pretty common, I would say, among our listeners, and especially within the U.S. We know of this kind of cohort model and all of that with homeschooling. So, what have you found when you guys began going through this? I guess would have been before. It would have been before your kids were really school age necessarily, right? Your ETC beginnings.
Yeah. I think our youngest was like 2.
Yeah.
And the other one was 4 at the time.
How do you when you guys think about like the way that homeschool operates now and the things that you are trying to help with other folks who are just getting started in that journey as well? Like, are there some things you can point to that you say, like, man, these are some principles that we've seen employed within the homeschool setting that have really been a game changer for us as it relates to ETC and with being trauma informed?
Yeah, I would say probably for me the biggest thing that I had to do was drop all expectations. There's some wonderful homeschooling families out there that do these incredible things, and they have this schedule where they start at 8 and they finish at 1, and that's the school day, and then they have like bam, 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 like everything lined up, and we do this and that and the next thing and the next thing. And
are we not doing that?
So Tom's not at home for most of the day. Sorry, surprise. I know he knows this. And I think it can be incredibly disheartening when you're parenting kids who've had trauma, and you're trying to employ all these incredible things that other people are doing so well, and you're just watching them, fail. Fail is maybe not a great word, but something as simple as other families like take for granted how difficult, like something as simple as a read aloud time. Now, I was so like, oh my word, read alouds, like we're going to be the read aloud family, I love the read aloud family, so nothing against them. But the minute I tried to get all my kids to sit down and listen to one story together, it just didn't work. It just didn't work because I have different levels of sensory issues. I have different levels of kids that are like incredibly active and then kids that are not. And I mean, you know what it's like trying to keep the hyper child to sit down and read. And even when they say, but it's okay, you can let them go off. Well, it's not, when the child is outside jumping on the trampoline and like two of them are at your feet and one of them's down the hall, doing whatever. And there were expectations like that I just had to let go of because they just didn't work for our family. And I think that it's okay. It's okay to say, you know what, these are the things we can do. For us, we've had like a non-negotiable on maths and English. That has to happen. And the rest of the time, it kind of is a very fluid schedule. There's no, like, you will sit down and you will do this and you will do that. And, it just doesn't work. And so, yeah, I think releasing yourself of those burdens, if you will, I think is the best thing that you can do.
And I think you've looked at like more of an interest-based learning approach as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which often, typically our kids, when we send them to school, it's like you need to fit into that mold and you need to fit into the system, and everything about them just doesn't fit, and when you can sort of piggyback on an interest, it really helps.
Yeah. Like our 11-year-old, almost 11-year-old, he is absolutely baking and cooking mad. Like he just loves to be in the kitchen. And so we just fly with that, and it's not your traditional, like, oh, let's all sit down and read or, it's a lot more practical things. We do a lot more practical things than hours of book work.
He's making fried chicken tomorrow night if you want to come around.
I would love to. I'll be there. Yes. And then, Tom, with your work, obviously being in schools, one of the things that you mentioned you're starting to do is begin helping to, train teachers and give classroom suggestions for more trauma-informed spaces. Do you want to share more about that with us?
Yeah, I think in classrooms, typically in South Africa, teachers have gone through a process, they've got their degree or they've got whatever qualifications allows them to get into a classroom. And I still think, by and large, it's very traditional. Most of the approaches, at least from their training, I would say it's probably similar to what you were trained in 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's really up to the school, I think, to be quite front-footed and think, okay, where's education going? Are we going to keep doing the stock standard thing, or are we going to think out of the box? Are we going to look at interest rates? Are we going to, are we going to look and try and connect subjects? And why do we do these subjects? And is this child just have to sit in these straight rows, or is this child going to wear headphones or bounce on a ball or be able to play with something, fidget or have gum or eat every now and then, not just because he or she happens to have diabetes. But that's very much, reliant on the people who are running the schools. If they've really caught on to this idea of we don't have to do things the same way for the next 50 years like we've done them. And actually we can't. regardless of COVID. Now we're finding kids who are a whole new level of, experiencing anxiety and dealing with stuff at home. So I find definitely with teachers, more and more, they are less able to employ these very traditional ways of doing stuff. And I think their traditional expectations of you're in a class, you sit down and you just follow me. I think those ideas are getting harder and harder to to implement in a classroom setting, and they're having to become more flexible. They're having to question what is going on here. Is there a sensory issue here? When a child is ADD, how does that look in my classroom? And I think they're more and more having to say, how can I make things fit for this child rather than force this child to fit in the way it has been? And so I do think there is an increased awareness in that, and I think there's an increased appetite in schools, which is great, because they're realizing that there is this need to understand that not all kids are the same, not all kids come with the same baggage, not all kids have the same needs, or have behaviors that are just because they want to push the teacher's button. Sometimes they can't. And, so I do think there's a little bit of a movement forward, but it is reliant on the people running the show, the captains of these ships, to have an appetite for it. So yeah.
Yeah. And as you've started to do that, have you found there's been a few simple things that you've begun to implement that have been more successful than others or easier as an introduction for others, like things inside the classroom? Are there school leaders who have been, there seem to be some principles that take on faster than others?
Yeah, I think for me, what I've always loved is this, this idea of what is the need behind the behavior.
Yeah.
And I think just this week we were looking at a particular child who had a very erratic week. And this idea of, okay, well, we're going to have to partner with the parents. And I think this idea of something's wrong with child X, fix it. I don't think it's ever been a very successful approach, but now I think there's more of a buy-in to this idea of the child is a product of he or she getting up in the morning, having breakfast, on the way to school. How are they experiencing that transition from home to car, from car to school, into the classroom? How are they experiencing the noise at home? Are they having breakfast? Parents are having to look at, those sort of things as well. And just for this particular child, this idea of looking at, I think we did it as well, this idea of a behavior journal. Not what they have is, what do they have? Is like daily report things, which is basically like, did you behave? Tick yes or no, and then they say what happened. Mm-hmm. It's more of everybody coming together and going, right, let's try and find let's just map out this child's entire week or 2 weeks and try to figure out, are there any triggers here that we can work with? And I think it's more of an approach of how do we best support you rather than how do we effectively punish you? And I think that is just such a connected approach, and it's an approach I think that brings everybody in, the teachers, the parents, but also the kids as well. So you're not a problem. You just might need to have one of your needs met better, and we're going to try and figure it out with you. And so I think that for me is always guided when I'm in interaction with kids is, what is the need here? There's always a need behind the behavior. It's not just behavior. And I think that's a drum that I always try to bang with teachers. And, and I think from a sensory perspective, just to create a bit of awareness of what's going on in their world, and perhaps looking at it from that way, and not just the behavior, not just this is happening. So I think for me, it's always that need portion is it's a very interesting question to ask, and just for them to sort of partner with you, with the parents, with the child, and sort of, okay, I'm going to look, I'm going to figure out, be a little investigator here. And I think that has been quite a practical and helpful tool.
That's great. As far as within the house, so at home for you guys, this has been an incredibly hard season for humanity, right? For any of us who have been on planet Earth the last 2 years, it's been a really, really hard season. Why don't you guys talk about maybe some ways in your home that you've seen, maybe something has flared up, and then you've figured out a way to kind of investigate and figure out what's going on, and obviously without not oversharing, obviously. But have there been things that you have noticed these last 2 years that have been practices and kind of tools, so to speak, that have helped you along the way to get through this time in COVID?
Yeah. So funnily enough, I was watching one of the the new module things that I'm sorry, why have I forgotten the name?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm so sorry, Jeff.
I'm so sorry.
Don't take my badge.
It's too far of a trip. I can't.
And Jesse actually said something that was such a light bulb moment for me, because I hadn't really thought of this sort of, and I wouldn't want to call it an issue, but something that was going on with one of our kiddos. She said something about one of her kids' personalities drastically changed during COVID. And it hit me, because I thought, oh my goodness, there's someone else out there who's, we have one specific, our probably most sensitive child who, generally she was okay socially and things were fine before COVID. And then COVID hit, and she was always sensitive before, but through those 2 years it got to a point where if people came to the house, she wouldn't come out from her room. She would, she won't sit at a table with us. She will she kind of avoids all social contacts if she can. And I think over the last 2 years, I didn't really think of it as a COVID thing. I thought, I don't know, I was trying to figure out like what is going on with her, and that kind of just hit me, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is what's happened, and I just, because we homeschool, I didn't really think that it would affect my kids that much.
Right.
We were at home anyway. But I suppose just the fact that we couldn't even see the regular people that we see on a daily basis, which are like grandparents and aunties and uncles and the few homeschool friends that we connect with. So we've had to have an extreme amount of grace for this child, like an extreme amount. And we've had to coach our other kids through having an extreme amount of grace for her as well, which is, it's been hard. It's been difficult, for us who have able to regulate our emotions somewhat. And then for your the other ones in the house who really have not, such a great ability to do that. So it's been pulling her close. So sorry, all that to say, it's really been keeping her close in the moments where it's been the most difficult to do it, because the behaviors have just been, just really hard. But I know when I pull her close, she's a totally different child. I can turn her mood around within 3 seconds if I can just calm myself down enough to pull her into my lap and help her calm,
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that is it. I think we've underestimated how being at home and limiting our interaction with people has actually affected our kids. It's affected us. Going out. I mean, now when we don't have to wear masks anymore. I think we were the last country in the world to drop that. But I still remember the day I first put on a mask, and I was in a grocery store, and there was 2 of us, and it felt weird. Yeah. But now the reverse is happening, where it's like, I need to pull this thing off, and I feel just as weird. And what I found with young people as well, what was interesting, I know sort of going to the adolescent age, and they wear more hoodies and they cover their head and, trying to hide from the world. But now they can't really wear this mask. All of a sudden they had this extra layer of spy gear that they got to put on and hide from everything. Totally. And now you've had this 2 years of not being used to people, and now you've had this mask pulled off, so they're just stuck with their hoodies again, but they're a lot more sensitive. So I think that being at home and not being around people, that has been quite a jump for us. So like, okay, so now when we're going out, we have to be more sensitive and more aware, and yeah, I think that's been across the board with many families as well, just navigating that, and I think that's where this helps, this understanding of where our kids are. It's building empathy in parents and building a capacity to draw yourself towards yourself in the moment and going, they need this. I need to be the thermostat and not the thermometer. And even though at the moment I'm frustrated, I need to pull you close. And I think that's perhaps been quite a useful thing for parents, because typically you just say, oh, get over it. But now you've got kids where you really can't say that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So Don, you touched on something that I want to talk more about, because it is something that affects, I would say, our family personally, and we know a lot of others in the situation. But when you have a large family and you have somebody who's struggling in particular, that can be a wild challenge, because mom and dad might be tuned in to that child's needs and knowing, okay, we've got to figure out a way to regulate whatever. Asking the other kids in the house to also be, etc. Appropriate support systems in that time is hard, if not impossible. So I wonder if there's been some things that you guys have found that have helped, whether it's either little catchphrases or scripts or something like that, or even maybe some systems you guys have put in place to kind of help in teaching your kids how to support each other.
Be kind.
That's a script. Be kind.
That's one of, and it is a big thing, because other kids don't. They get very cross and they can flip their lids properly. And you're right. It's well, you guys signed up for this stuff, and this is your deal, and you can engage and empower and connect as much as you want. But right now, I want to throw my sibling in the pool.
Right.
Another realization that I had just over this whole thing as well is that I had to take ownership of some stuff, because I started to realize, so, we spent it, at least, although we came across the ETC stuff when our youngest, second was about 2 or 3, I'd say it took us a good couple of years to really flip sort of the way that we were thinking and the way we were parenting. So our older two were very much, raised in a bit more of a traditional parenting way.
Yeah.
And I had a moment where I looked at them and I said, they are not tolerating in her the stuff that we wouldn't tolerate in them. Yeah. And it was quite a big thing to, to recognize that, and then to say to them, I'm sorry that we couldn't deal with that in you. And it's really hard. And I know that it's hard for you guys to see that behavior and to feel like we're letting it slide, or we're being too lenient, or, so I'll often kind of say to them, well, what would you like me to do? I want to see where their heads are at. What do you think I should be doing here? Because I know that they don't want us, that they don't believe in spanking for sure. Right. They got spanked as kids, before we knew any better.
Sure.
But I know that in those moments they are like, you need to deal with this. You need to be hard, and you need to, Right. So I'm like, let me own that one.
Well, yeah, I think that we find ourselves, and it's funny because I think, and I don't know if y'all are the same way, we got 4 kids, and I could probably tell you 4 different moments in where all 3 have to support one of them, right? So like none of them are perfect. And sometimes, like situationally, they all do better than the other in, depending on what the environment is like, right? And so they all have different triggers. And so I say all that to say, like, there are just different moments throughout the day where we find ourselves like yelling or like, well, I don't know what the right phrase is, like either yelling scripts to the others as we're trying to support the one who's in distress, or we find ourselves just looking back and being like, now you understand that is not how we do this. This is about, like, as if they're co-parents with us. Like, that is not how we parent this child. But I think it does, we've had those moments of self-reflection too, to say like, we've got to find ways, particularly when we have some who are more sensitive to others when there's other kids in the room, and then some who don't want to be isolated. So I mean, there's just these moments for each of them. So knowing them and knowing what they need kind of helps us in those moments to prepare. But it takes a lot of like conversations outside of those, I hate war analogies, but it very much in those moments feels like you've got the missile sirens going off, and you've got to very quickly get everybody to their stations,
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't know if you guys have other thoughts besides that of like things that in a big family that have worked for you guys.
I think what is also important is handling things outside of the moment. I think not a case of, you just wait till mom or dad comes home, not that sort of thing, but I think I've tried to take kids out individually on little dates, and also to try to go, hey, how are we doing? Not just our relationship, but as parents, like, how are you perceiving us? How are you seeing us with your siblings? And in those moments where emotions are not elevated, having honest conversation, and also giving them voice, allowing them to be, frustrated, or in those moments when they're exploding because, one of their siblings has just stolen their sweets for the 4 millionth time or something like that. They're allowed to be upset. They're allowed to be frustrated, and to give voice to that frustration, and to value that, and honor that, but also honor the fact that this other child's not doing it to be mean or horrible. But a lot of the time, I think those conversations, you kind of need to hold space with them in the moment. And then once things subside, then I find it a lot more effective to go, look, I know that hurt, and I know that was upsetting, but you've got to understand that this is what we are dealing with. And, so they still feel like they're allowed to feel, because they're still kids, So then giving voice to all of them can be challenging, and valuing their voice all the time can be challenging. I find out of the moment, it perhaps is a bit easier.
We've tried. We do it with our older two, maybe like once a term, not as often as we'd like. A term is like a school, I don't know, semester. And the younger two are not really part of that conversation, but we will have an evening where we sit them down and we just say, hey, is there anything that you want to say? How are we doing? How are we doing as parents? Like, how are you feeling? Is there anything that you would like us to do less of, or, but do less of, do more of? And those have been very valuable, because I think we've had a few fights where in the middle of heightened emotions, one is like, you have said that I have a voice and now you are not, and in that moment we have to be like, okay, he's right. Stop, listen.
I think it's definitely, we're all in this. Obviously there are parents in the situation, but at the same time also some of our kids are getting a bit older now as well, and they're trying to sort of discover their own authority, and their how much autonomy do they have, and all the rest of it. And you know, and we're also discovering, you know, what it's like to have a teenager. You know, this is, you know, the first time we've, you know, so, and I think we've also been quite honest with that, going, hey, you know what, I haven't done this before, and I'm going to make mistakes just as you're going to make mistakes, and we kind of need to just cover each other in grace a little bit. You know, I'm going to try my best, and I do give you access to say, hey, you know, with respect, please. You know, if you're missing a mark or something like that. But I think what's also very good is we're the ones who say sorry first. I think that's very important. I think you have to model that. You know, I think we often are expecting behavior of our kids that if we were to sort of step outside our bodies, we'd be like, whoa.
Yeah.
You know, and that is a challenge. And when we don't meet the mark, I'm sorry, I dropped the ball there. And when they don't want to forgive you in that moment, that's okay. You know,
trying very hard to breathe through, wanting to pull it all back.
Right.
You don't deserve my apology. I'm taking it back.
That's right. You don't accept it? Well, never mind. It's not yours to accept anymore. Yeah. Well, and I think that is so much of parenting. And we talked about this with Jesse last week on the show about repairing. So much of that repair work is just being planted in the ground, right? We're not going to see the fruit from that until much later. And then sometimes you're kind of like, hey, I've planted a whole lot of seeds and I don't see that's coming up yet. Is it still, you know,
where's my harvest
into the soil, right? Roots taking, you know. So I think that is so wise. So shifting gears, kind of last thing I want to talk about was, you know, you guys mentioned, and we've talked before about when you were, COVID was beginning to shut things down, and I think it might have been you guys were the first ones we talked to when stuff really hit the States. Was a few months after it had shut down in South Africa, and we were talking about, can we do this over Zoom? And you guys were like, oh yeah, we're rolling right now. We got people from everywhere in our classes. Like, and so if you don't mind, would you mind just kind of sharing what some of your discoveries have been through being able to broaden that scope and how this content has been able to not just kind of transcend borders of countries, but even into different cultures and stuff as well?
Yeah, I think what was nice is, you know, being allowed to go beyond because the course typically runs for 8 weeks. It's practically impossible for us to bounce, you know, to different provinces. We kind of stuck where we are, and people weren't really going to come, you know, 14, 15 hours,
right?
Because they just can't do that. So it allowed us to gain access to different parts of South Africa, to the Philippines, to Zimbabwe. You know, it even went out, as we mentioned earlier, as far as the Singapore and that, and that was great. It's a part, and it was nice also being in the middle because time zones also work better with South Africa. So it was nice that people further along had an in-betweener to sort of engage with. So that was useful. And culturally, we found that it fitted in. I mean, I think especially the folks from the Philippines, they were very interested in it, and it certainly gave them these moments where they just sat back there. I think they were specifically engaging with young people. They wanted to like a more of a trauma-informed youth ministry type approach, and for them, I think they really found value in, you know, the idea of unpacking the trauma and not just seeing the child, but seeing what has happened to this child, so that they've arrived where they're at because of it.
I also love they were so engaged with the content, and I think one of the guys was an American pastor.
Yeah, from Hawaii. Yeah,
and so they didn't just do the 2 hours on a Saturday. They actually met midweek all together to debrief on everything that they had heard. And so I think, like, for people that maybe like English was their second language, they also had this guy that was kind of like the like mediator and tying things together. So I mean, they really, like, it was great. It was really great to see how they did.
No, and I think that was great because they these breakout classes that you can obviously have on Zoom and that sort of thing, but in a 2-hour session, it's accessible for the 2 hours, and you can meet people because you're not sort of jamming it in over 3 days. But then that freedom to like, hey, we can do this online. We can take this online in midweek, and would you mind popping in and sitting with us again in midweek? And it just opened up that access, which was really wonderful. I think one of the practicalities, because it's not it's not in a room, people could hide. And I think if you remember from your TBRI training, you're sitting there with like all of these little screens going here, and you could every now and then go, you're not focusing.
Right.
So what we did actually find in person, I know when we were doing it with you guys, this idea of keeping it small, keeping it intimate, because you want to build relationships, and that what we did find quite useful is when it went online, having a bit bigger of a group now actually became quite valuable, because then there was more talkers, and then they were drawing, whereas you couldn't do that face to face in a little room.
Yeah.
But now, because it was online, it did sort of initiate a lot more conversations. And also, what I thought was also quite nice is a lot of those people perhaps wouldn't have been able to attend because, so a couple of people who were running places of safety in orphanages and that sort of thing, they wouldn't have been able to leave where they were and come to a training.
Yeah.
But, I mean, people here who do that, but this particular lady from Zimbabwe who runs an orphan care ministry there, didn't have to leave what she was doing, Yeah. And the value of that was the experience these people were then bringing into the room was just amazing. So it wasn't just people talking and teaching; it was this whole sort of collaborative effect, and they could then bring in stories that, hey, and many of them had heard of TBRI and trained in it, and they wanted refreshers and that. And I think the Zimbabwe lady actually had done ETC or something like
maybe a similar course.
Years ago. It was just such a value add having people who are on the ground, almost partnering with you in this journey, and then you have all these other people who might be new to it, and they were able to lean on you, but then they also go, oh, well, your context is a bit more like mine, and so it was actually great, and the online did allow for that. So what was like will this work actually did start showing actually there are some great pluses to this. And then, and the recording it and sending it out afterwards, and that, it just the accessibility of it was really wonderful, I found. Yeah.
I do think you guys are probably our furthest reaching ETC trainers in terms of like the ground that you cover and people in classes is staggering. It's been incredible. Guys, this has been really fun getting caught up and talking about all of this. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we will hope, will you tell people about your podcast and where they can listen to it?
Okay, so our podcast, I think, only has like 10 episodes, because when did it stop? When you started studying?
It's got 2 seasons. All right, we went to season 2, and we are going to get going with it again. Much like Stranger Things, we're building anticipation.
Right.
But you can follow the Grafted family, because I do still keep the Instagram page going.
That's right.
The podcasts
are there.
They are there.
Yeah. Well, just personally, I would just say it's enjoyable. You should go listen to it, and it will build your anticipation for season 3. And so hopefully that'll come soon. And hopefully, like Stranger Things, soon it'll open up huge endorsement deals for you guys and all that. And maybe we'll see you on some pizza boxes and that kind of thing very soon.
Coffee cups. Oh.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thanks, JD.
Thanks, JD.
Well, I told you we're going to love Tom and Don, and we certainly do. We're just really grateful for them coming on today. So thank you to them. I will also say, make sure that you check out their social media connected below in the show notes, but also listening to the Grafted Family podcast. You can put some pressure on them for season 3 on social media as well. Sorry, Tom. But also I would say the initiatives they are a part of, both in fundraising for adoption work in South Africa, as well as just the litany of things that they're involved in there are worth your time and your consideration to give to. And so you can find those links below in the show notes. I will say, coming up, we have some big announcements in a few weeks that we can't wait to tell you about. But just whet the appetite, we got some merch coming, and some of the final T-shirt designs, water bottle designs have come through, and they are great. So we can't wait to share them with you here in a few weeks and make them available for you to purchase. And so as we work to just continue creating resources and just equipping parents who are in the field working day in, day out, caregivers as well. We want to be mindful of creating new content and getting new resources, new offerings out there. And so to do that, we are going to get creative in how we are able to fundraise for that. And so you'll hear more about that in a few weeks. And we are really excited for what's coming down the pipe. And so I hope you are as well. In the coming few weeks, get some fresh new interviews, exciting folks we've got on that we have not had on yet before. And so we're pumped to have them, and you're going to love them. We can't wait to introduce you to them soon. So without any else to say today, for everyone at ETC, from Mo and Tana Ottinger, for Kyle Wright, who edits and engineers all of our audio, for Tad Jewett, the creator of the music behind the ETC podcast, I'm JD Wilson, and we will see you next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast.